I knew I was being pushed out the moment I saw the meeting invite. A private meeting, no subject line, no agenda notes. I'd seen this play before, and it never ended with good news. The calendar notification sat there like a death sentence in my inbox, scheduled for 3:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. That would mark the beginning of my calculated revenge. But this time, I wasn't just going to be another casualty of corporate politics. This time, I would become the architect of their downfall, using nothing but patience, data, and the arrogance of those who thought they could threaten my career without consequences. My name is Natalie Carter, and I've spent nearly a decade building something I thought mattered at Data Vault Solutions. 34 years old, single by choice, married to spreadsheets and predictive models that saved this company millions. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Black coffee, 2 monitors lit up with dashboards, the familiar hum of the office coming alive around 8:30 a.m. Then Evan Brooks appeared at my desk. "Got a minute?" He didn't wait for an answer. Already walking toward his corner office, Evan had been my direct supervisor for 3 years, the kind of manager who took credit for your wins and distanced himself from your struggles. His Patagonia vest and carefully groomed beard screamed Silicon Valley wannabe, despite us being in Chicago. I followed him into his office, noting how he closed the door with unusual care. The blinds were already drawn. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral, a skill I'd perfected during countless meetings where men explained my own work back to me. "Natalie, you know we value your contributions," he began, and I almost laughed. Nothing good ever followed that opening. "But we're restructuring the analytics division. The retention strategy team needs fresh perspectives." Fresh perspectives. Corporate speak for "you're being replaced." "I'm moving you to special projects," he continued, avoiding eye contact by shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. "It's a lateral move, same salary, but it'll give you more flexibility to explore different areas of the business. Special projects, the graveyard where careers went to die." I'd watched 3 colleagues get reassigned there over the years. None lasted more than 6 months before leaving the company entirely. "And retention strategy?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'd seen Kyle Mason hovering around my desk lately, asking questions about my models with fake curiosity. "Kyle will be taking the lead. He's got some innovative ideas about simplifying our approach." Evan finally looked at me, trying to gauge my reaction. "You'll help with the transition. Of course. Make sure he has everything he needs." Kyle Mason, 28 years old, MBA from a mid-tier school his daddy probably paid for, and the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. He'd been at the company 18 months and spent most of that time in meetings, throwing around buzzwords like synergy and paradigm shift, while contributing nothing of substance. His main talent was his golf game and his ability to laugh at Evan's terrible jokes. "When does this transition happen?" I kept my voice steady, professional. Inside, I was calculating, not plotting yet, just calculating. "Effective immediately. Kyle's already been briefed on the new direction. We're calling it Customer Pulse 2.0. He said it like it was revolutionary, not a repackaging of the framework I'd built from scratch. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, maintaining the composure that had served me through every microaggression, every overlooked promotion, every time someone assumed I was the note-taker instead of the data scientist. "I'll make sure Kyle has what he needs." "I knew you'd be professional about this," Evan said, relief washing over his face. He'd expected tears, maybe anger. He'd prepared for emotion, not this cold acceptance. Walking back to my desk, I passed Kyle in the hallway. He gave me a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Natalie, looking forward to learning from you," he said, already speaking like the position was his birthright. "I'm sure you are," I replied, matching his fake warmth. At my desk, I opened my laptop and began what looked like preparation for transition. In reality, I was creating a new encrypted folder on my personal cloud drive. I named it Echo Files, because echoes always come back, sometimes louder than the original sound. I started documenting every model, every algorithm, every data point that made our retention strategy successful. But more importantly, I began tracking what would come next. Every change Kyle would make, every corner he'd cut, every number he'd eventually manipulate to make himself look good. They thought they were pushing me out quietly, professionally, with no fuss. They had no idea they'd just activated something far more dangerous than an angry employee. They'd created a patient one with access, knowledge, and nothing left to lose. The humiliation came in waves, each one more calculated than the last. Within 2 weeks, Kyle had dismantled everything I'd built, replacing complex predictive models with what he called intuitive dashboards, colorful charts that told executives exactly what they wanted to hear, regardless of what the data actually said. I watched from my new desk in special projects, tucked away in what used to be a storage room near the server farm. The constant hum of machines became my soundtrack as Kyle paraded around the main floor, presenting Customer Pulse 2.0 to anyone who would listen. He'd taken my algorithms and stripped them down to basic averages, removing the nuanced factors that actually predicted customer behavior. But the charts looked pretty, and that's all that mattered to leadership. The first major change came at the Monday morning all-hands. Kyle stood at the front, laser pointer dancing across slides I recognized. My slides, with his name now prominently displayed in the corner. "We're simplifying our approach," he announced, his voice carrying that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having to clean up your own messes. The old system was unnecessarily complex. Customer Pulse 2.0 focuses on what really matters, the big picture. The big picture. Code for, I don't understand the details, so I'm ignoring them. I took screenshots of every slide, noting the subtle changes, where my model had tracked 17 variables that influenced customer retention. Kyle's version tracked 5, where I had predictive warnings for at-risk accounts starting 90 days out. He'd reduced it to 30. He'd essentially given the company a pair of binoculars and told them it was just as good as a telescope. The isolation was deliberate and thorough. My Slack channels went quiet. I'd been removed from the analytics team workspace, the retention strategy group, even the casual water cooler chat channel. Emails that used to flood my inbox slowed to a trickle. Former teammates avoided eye contact in the hallway, afraid that association with the exiled might be contagious. But I wasn't completely forgotten. Every few days, Kyle would appear at my desk with a confused expression and a question about some old formula he'd found. I'd explain it to him, watching him nod along while clearly not understanding. Then he'd leave and implement his own interpretation, always wrong, always oversimplified. I documented these interactions meticulously, screenshots of his questions, recordings of his fundamental misunderstandings, copies of the bastardized implementations. The echo files grew larger each day. 3 weeks into the transition, I noticed the first red flag in the system. A cluster of enterprise accounts, our biggest clients, had disappeared from the main dashboard. Not canceled, not downgraded, just absent. I dug deeper through my limited access and found them buried in a subcategory Kyle had created called seasonal variance accounts. "It's noise in the data," Kyle explained when I casually asked about it over coffee. "These accounts always fluctuate. Including them skews the real metrics." Noise. He'd just categorized $8 million in annual recurring revenue as noise. I smiled and nodded, then went back to my desk and pulled the historical data. Those accounts didn't fluctuate. They were steady as clockwork. What they were, however, was showing early warning signs of churn according to my original model. Kyle's solution to bad news was to hide it. The reports got worse each week. Numbers massaged, trends adjusted for market conditions, customer feedback cherry-picked to support predetermined conclusions. The executive team was flying blind, but the instrument panel Kyle had given them showed all green lights. I started creating parallel reports, the real numbers versus Kyle's fantasy. My original model, still running on a virtual machine I'd kept active, painted a starkly different picture. Customer satisfaction dropping, churn rate climbing, early warning signals flashing red. But in Kyle's reports, everything was optimized and streamlined. The Thursday before the quarterly review, I stayed late, using my access to pull raw data directly from the servers. That's when I found the smoking gun. Kyle wasn't just hiding declining accounts. He was actively recategorizing churned customers as strategically discontinued, making it look like the company was being selective rather than losing clients. Sitting alone in that converted storage room at 9:45 p.m., surrounded by the white noise of servers and the glow of monitors showing two completely different realities. I realized something. They hadn't just humiliated me, they'd handed me the perfect weapon. Kyle's incompetence, Evan's negligence, and the company's willful blindness had created a paper trail of deception so clear that when it finally came to light, there would be no explaining it away. I saved everything to the Echo files, encrypted and backed up in 3 different locations. Then I leaned back in my chair and smiled for the first time in weeks. They thought they'd buried me in special projects, but they'd actually given me the perfect vantage point to watch them build their own pyres. Numbers don't lie. But Kyle had turned them into world-class actors by week 6 of his reign over retention strategy. The performance was Oscar-worthy. The September reports showed a churn rate of just 3%, a miracle considering I knew the real number was closer to 15%. I discovered his methodology purely by accident. Or maybe it wasn't an accident that I happened to be running database queries at 6:30 a.m. when Kyle thought no one would notice his back-end changes. He was reclassifying customers who hadn't formally canceled, but hadn't engaged in 90 days as dormant, rather than churned. Dormant didn't count against retention metrics. It was accounting fraud wearing the mask of data science. The real artistry came in how he presented it. In the weekly leadership meeting, which I could watch through the glass walls from my exile in special projects, Kyle would pull up his dashboards with theatrical flair. "We've reduced churn by 40% quarter over quarter," he announced, his gel-slicked hair catching the conference room lights. The executives nodded appreciatively. The CFO actually applauded. I compared his presentation to my shadow analysis. My original model, still quietly running its calculations, showed we'd lost 12% of our revenue-generating customers in the last quarter. Not just any customers, the profitable ones, the long-term contracts, the enterprise accounts that formed our foundation. Kyle had hidden them all under creative categorizations: strategic restructuring, temporary holds, and my personal favorite, optimization candidates. But the numbers knew the truth, and they started screaming it in ways Kyle couldn't control. First came the revenue discrepancies. The finance team noticed that actual cash flow didn't match the rosy customer counts. When pressed, Kyle explained it away as payment timing issues and seasonal billing cycles. He created yet another category: revenue pending reconciliation. I documented every lie, creating a parallel universe of data in my Echo files. Screenshot after screenshot, query result after query result. I built comparison charts showing Kyle's reported metrics versus actual database records. The gap widened each week like a mouth opening to scream. Then I found the smoking gun that would become nuclear material. Kyle hadn't just been hiding churned customers. He'd been retroactively changing historical data to make his improvements look more dramatic. 3 months of historical churn rates had been quietly adjusted upward, making his current false numbers appear to be a stunning turnaround. I pulled the archived data from our backup servers, data that predated Kyle's access. The real historical churn rate, 7%. Kyle's revised history, 11%. His current reported rate, 3%. He'd manufactured an 8-point improvement out of thin air. The audit logs told the whole story. Every change time-stamped, every query logged, every manipulation traceable to Kyle's user ID. He'd been sloppy, probably assuming no one would ever look. Or maybe he thought his charm and Evan's protection made him untouchable. I started building what I called the translation guide, a document that mapped every one of Kyle's creative categories back to reality. Dormant meant churned. Optimization candidates meant lost to competitors. Strategic restructuring meant contracts canceled, each translation supported by SQL queries, database exports, and screenshot evidence. The Thursday before the quarterly board meeting, I noticed something that made my blood run cold, then hot with opportunity. Kyle had started moving major enterprise accounts into a category called pending renewal, even though their contracts didn't expire for 6 months. I recognized the pattern. He was pre-staging his excuse for when these accounts inevitably churned. He could claim they were always at risk, and that losing them was expected, not a failure of his system. Except I had emails from those account managers, forwarded to me back when I was still relevant, expressing concerns about service issues that my original model had flagged weeks ago, issues that Kyle's simplified system couldn't detect and his reports didn't acknowledge. I cross-referenced everything the account manager concerns, the model predictions, Kyle's categorizations, and the actual customer communication logs. The story they told was damning. We were about to lose our 3 biggest clients, together worth $18 million in annual revenue, and Kyle was already covering his tracks while telling leadership everything was fine. That night, working late again in my server room exile, I compiled it all into a single encrypted file I called The Real Pulse, 43 pages of evidence showing not just incompetence, but deliberate deception. Charts showing the true versus reported metrics, audit logs proving data manipulation, email threads demonstrating willful blindness to customer concerns. I didn't send it to anyone, not yet. Instead, I did something more subtle. I updated my original predictive model with the real current data and set it to automatically generate a report at 8 a.m. Monday morning, 1 hour before the quarterly board meeting. The report would go to a simple shared folder that I still had access to, a folder that the finance team checked regularly for reconciliation data. I titled the automated report innocuously, Legacy Model Variance Analysis Q3, boring enough to avoid Kyle's attention, specific enough to catch a financial analyst's eye. Then I leaned back and watched Kyle's latest dashboard update propagate through the system. Best quarter ever, the headline proclaimed. The lies were so bold now, so detached from reality, that their collapse would be spectacular. The numbers never lie. They were about to prove it. The allies came to me without knowing they were allies, drawn by discrepancies that Kyle's fantasy couldn't explain away. It started with Marcus from finance, a detail-oriented analyst who'd survived 3 layoffs by being impossibly thorough. "Natalie," he said, appearing at my isolation chamber on a Tuesday afternoon. "Something's off with the Q3 billing reconciliation. The customer count shows we added 42 enterprise accounts, but I can only find invoices for 12 new ones. You worked on the retention system before. Any idea what I'm missing?" I kept my expression neutral, helpful but not too eager. "Have you checked the categorization changes? Sometimes accounts get reclassified mid-quarter." Marcus frowned, his fingers already moving across his laptop. "Reclassified from what to what?" "Oh, Kyle implemented some new categories, dormant, pending renewal, that sort of thing. Maybe some existing accounts got moved around." I watched the realization dawn on his face as he pulled up the data. These new accounts, they're all dated from 2 years ago. They're not new at all, just recategorized. "Interesting," I said, returning to my screen. "You should probably document that for the audit trail." Marcus left, but I knew he'd be back. The seed was planted. 2 days later, Sarah from legal knocked on my doorframe. "Hey, do you have a minute? I'm reviewing some contract compliance issues, and I need to understand something about customer data tracking." Sarah was sharp, Harvard Law, and took compliance seriously enough to read every line of every contract. She'd caught 2 potential lawsuits before they happened. 3 of our enterprise clients are claiming we're in breach of our SLA agreements, she continued, pulling up emails on her tablet. They say we failed to provide the predictive alerts specified in their contracts, but Kyle's reports show we're exceeding all service metrics. I tilted my head thoughtfully. "Which clients?" She listed them. All 3 were in Kyle's pending renewal category. Despite having contracts through next year, all 3 had been flagged by my original model 8 weeks ago. The predictive alerts were part of the old system, I explained carefully. The new Customer Pulse 2.0 might track different metrics. You'd have to ask Kyle about the specifics of what alerts are currently being sent. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Different metrics. The contracts specify exact parameters. We can't just change what we track without client consent." "I'm sure Kyle has documentation on the transition," I said. "He's very thorough." We both knew that was a lie. Sarah left with the determined walk of someone about to dig until they hit bedrock. The customer service rebellion started with Janet, a team lead who'd been with the company 12 years. She cornered me by the coffee machine at 7:45 a.m. before most people arrived. "I'm losing my mind," she said without preamble. "My team is getting screamed at by clients who say they're about to cancel, but when I check Kyle's system, these accounts show as healthy or optimized. I can't get support approved for accounts that supposedly don't need it." I stirred my coffee slowly. Have you tried pulling the raw interaction logs? Sometimes the categorization algorithm has a delay. What algorithm? Janet asked. Kyle told us it's manually reviewed for accuracy. Manually reviewed. I kept my voice steady despite my inner satisfaction. That's interesting. The old system used predictive modeling based on interaction patterns. If he's doing it manually now, he's not doing it at all, Janet finished. He's just marking accounts based on whether they've complained to executives. If they haven't escalated, they're healthy by default. I said nothing, just sipped my coffee. Janet's face went through several expressions before settling on fury. Son of a bitch is setting my team up to fail. By Friday, I had unintentional allies in 3 departments, each discovering their own piece of Kyle's deception. Marcus was building a spreadsheet of revenue discrepancies. Sarah was documenting contract violations. Janet was collecting customer complaints that Kyle's system ignored. None of them knew about the others. None of them knew about my echo files, but I started leaving breadcrumbs that led them toward each other. A forwarded email to Marcus. From my old files. That happened to include Sarah on a contract discussion. A helpful suggestion to Janet that she check with finance about account status discrepancies. A casual mention to Sarah that customer service might have relevant complaint logs. I watched from my exile as they started talking, comparing notes, their individual concerns crystallizing into collective alarm. They met in conference room B at 4:30 p.m. on Friday, thinking they were being discreet. I could see them through the glass walls. Marcus's spreadsheet spread across the table. Sarah's legal pad filled with notes. Janet gesturing emphatically. They were building their own case, independent of mine. 3 witnesses who'd discovered the truth on their own, whose credibility was unimpeachable, who had no reason to lie. Kyle, meanwhile, was preparing his triumphant quarterly presentation, oblivious to the investigation forming around him. He'd sent out a department-wide email that morning. Excited to share our record-breaking Q3 results with the board on Monday, Customer Pulse 2.0 is revolutionizing how we understand retention. Revolution. He had no idea how right he was. I updated my automated report one last time, ensuring it would hit the shared folder at exactly 8 a.m. Monday. Then I sent individual calendar invites to Marcus, Sarah, and Janet for 8:15 a.m. Monday. Quick sync on Q3 data anomalies. Might be relevant for board meeting. They'd have 15 minutes to see my report before Kyle took the stage. 15 minutes for 3 credible employees to walk into that board meeting armed with truth. I didn't need to destroy Kyle myself. I just needed to hand the matches to people who'd already discovered he was soaked in gasoline. The shadows were where I thrived now, moving through systems like a ghost with legitimate access. Kyle had been so eager to push me aside that he'd never bothered to revoke my database permissions properly. After all, special projects needed data too, and IT was too overwhelmed to audit access logs for someone who'd already been neutralized. Sunday night, 11:47 p.m. The office was empty except for security guards who knew me as the workaholic who never left. I sat at my desk, 3 monitors glowing, and began my final reconnaissance. First, I submitted a routine data request through the official channels. Special Projects Customer Segment Analysis for Q4 Planning. Boring, bureaucratic. The kind of request that gets rubber-stamped without review. Within minutes, I had expanded access to the production database, granted by an automated system that recognized my senior analyst credentials. With legitimate access secured, I began running parallel processes. On one screen, Kyle's Customer Pulse 2.0 dashboard painted its rosy fiction. On another, my original predictive model churned through the same data, untainted by manipulation. The third screen displayed the raw truth, direct database queries showing actual customer status. The contrast was staggering. Kyle reported 3% churn. Reality showed 15.3%. Kyle claimed 42 new enterprise accounts. The database showed 12. With 30 existing accounts simply reclassified. Kyle's healthy customer segment included 17 accounts that hadn't logged in for 60 days. I started recording everything, using screen capture software to document the real-time data manipulation. At 12:23 a.m., I watched Kyle's automated script run, moving another batch of at-risk accounts into seasonal variants, the timestamp, the user ID, the exact SQL commands, all captured in pristine video evidence. But I needed more than just numbers. I needed to prove intent. I accessed the email archives, staying within my legitimate permissions by searching only for messages where I'd been included or CC'd before my exile. There it was, a thread from 6 weeks ago where Kyle asked Evan about flexibility in reporting metrics. Evan's response was damning. Just make sure the board sees growth. How you categorize things is your call. Then I found the smoking gun I hadn't even been looking for. In Kyle's personal network folder, which he'd carelessly given department-wide read access to, sat multiple versions of his board presentation. Version 1 through 4 showed progressive improvements in the numbers, not through better performance, but through increasingly creative categorization. Each version had notes. Still looks bad. Better, but board won't like the Q2 comparison. Maybe exclude the Thompson account. Version 5, the final, showed the fantasy he planned to present Monday. I compiled everything into a shadow presentation, mirroring Kyle's slide for slide, but with real data, where he showed a growth chart. I showed the actual decline, where he listed new accounts. I showed the reclassification trail, where he claimed reduced churn. I displayed the hidden categories where he'd buried the bodies. At 2:15 a.m., I discovered something that made me pause. 3 of our largest accounts, collectively worth $18 million annually, had submitted formal cancellation notices on Friday. The notices were in the system, but Kyle had marked them as pending review and excluded them from his Monday metrics. The board would be looking at numbers that were already 3 days out of date and missing critical losses. I pulled the cancellation notices, the support tickets that preceded them, and the ignored warning flags from my original model, dated 6 weeks back. These accounts hadn't just churned. They'd left a trail of complaints that Kyle's system had systematically ignored or hidden. Working through the night, I built a comprehensive timeline. Every data point, every manipulation, every ignored warning, arranged chronologically to tell the story of willful deception. I encoded it all into a secure package, then created something special, a live dashboard that would update in real time during Monday's meeting. The dashboard would look innocent enough at first, displaying Kyle's exact metrics, but I'd programmed it to reveal the truth in stages. 5 minutes into his presentation, it would show the first discrepancy. 10 minutes in, the hidden accounts would appear. 15 minutes, the real churn rate would surface. By 20 minutes, the full scope of the deception would be undeniable. I uploaded the dashboard to the conference room presentation system, scheduling it to replace Kyle's static slides at 9:05 a.m. 5 minutes after the meeting started, he'd log in, see his familiar opening slides, and begin his performance, not realizing the system would soon start contradicting every word. At 4:30 a.m., exhausted but exhilarated, I made my final move. I restored my original predictive model to full production status, not to replace Kyle's system, but to run alongside it. Every executive would receive 2 reports Monday morning, Kyle's fiction and my reality, side by side, impossible to ignore. I also scheduled one last email, timed for 8:55 a.m., from the system administrator account to the entire board. Automated alert: significant data discrepancy detected in retention metrics. Please review attached comparison before quarterly review meeting. The attachment would be my 43-page echo file, renamed simply Data Integrity Report Q3. I left the office as the sun rose, passing early morning joggers who had no idea what would unfold in 3 hours. Kyle thought he'd buried me in special projects, hidden me away where I couldn't interfere with his ascent. He was right about one thing. I had been hidden, but shadows were where predators waited, where truth gathered its strength, where patience transformed into precision. In 3 hours, Kyle would walk into that boardroom ready for his moment of triumph. He had no idea he'd be walking into an ambush built from his own lies, triggered by his own arrogance, and executed through the very systems he thought he controlled. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes everything seem sharper, more real. I arrived at 8:45 a.m., coffee in hand, settling into my exile corner just as the executive floor began filling with suits and nervous energy. The quarterly business review was the main event, where careers were made or destroyed based on 3 months of numbers. Kyle strutted past my desk at 8:50 a.m. without acknowledging me, his lucky red tie gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Evan followed close behind, both of them radiating the confidence of men who believed their own lies. At 9 a.m. sharp, the boardroom doors closed. Through the glass walls, I could see the Assembly CEO Margaret Walsh at the head, her expression unreadable as always. CFO David Park with his tablet and stylus ready, the entire C-suite arranged like a tribunal. Kyle stood at the presentation screen, clicking his remote with practiced ease. "Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to present Q3's exceptional performance." His first slide blazed across the screen. Customer retention, our best quarter ever. A bold green arrow pointed upward, claiming a 40% improvement in churn reduction. I watched from my desk, counting down. 4 minutes until my triggered dashboard would begin its reveal. Kyle continued his performance, gesturing at fabricated growth charts. Customer Pulse 2.0 has revolutionized how we identify and retain at-risk accounts. Our simplified approach has yielded remarkable results. 3 minutes. That's when Marcus from Finance raised his hand. "Quick question. Kyle, I'm seeing a discrepancy between your customer count and our invoicing records. Can you clarify?" Kyle's smile tightened imperceptibly. "Minor categorization adjustments. I'll be happy to walk you through the details after." "Actually," Sarah from Legal interrupted, standing up with her tablet. "I need clarification now. We have 3 enterprise clients claiming breach of contract for failure to provide predictive alerts. Yet your dashboard shows them as healthy accounts as of Friday." 2 minutes. Kyle's hand holding the remote began to tremble slightly. "Those accounts are under review. The categorization." "Those accounts canceled," Janet from customer service announced from the doorway. She wasn't supposed to be in the meeting, but she stood there holding printed emails. Friday afternoon, 18 million in combined annual revenue, gone. 1 minute. CEO Walsh's expression shifted from neutral to arctic. "Kyle, are you telling me we lost 18 million in revenue that isn't reflected in this presentation?" "It's pending review." The screen behind Kyle flickered. His static slide suddenly transformed into a split screen. On the left, his original chart. On the right, the real data beginning to populate. "What's happening?" Kyle clicked his remote frantically, but the presentation had taken on a life of its own. The churn rate adjusted before everyone's eyes. 3% became 7, then 11, then finally settled at 15.3%. The best quarter ever header remained, now a mockery hanging over disaster. "What the hell is this?" Evan stood up, his face flushing red. The screen transitioned again. Kyle's 42 new enterprise accounts dissolved, revealing themselves as reclassified existing accounts. The actual new accounts? 12. The net growth Kyle had promised -8%. CFO Park was pulling up his own laptop now, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm seeing the same data in the production database. These numbers? Kyle, explain this, now." Kyle's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Behind him, the presentation continued its autonomous reveal, each slide peeling back another layer of deception. Hidden categories appeared, dormant accounts that were actually churned, seasonal variants that masked major losses, pending renewal for accounts that had already left. Then came the killing blow. The timeline appeared, showing Kyle's systematic manipulation over 6 weeks, date stamps, user IDs, before and after screenshots of altered historical data. The audit trail was irrefutable. "You retroactively changed historical data." Walsh's voice was deadly quiet. "You falsified our baseline to make your performance look better." The room erupted. Board members were standing, voices raising, tablets and laptops appearing as everyone began pulling their own reports. The cacophony built until Walsh raised her hand for silence. "Mr. Mason, do you have an explanation?" Kyle looked at Evan desperately, but Evan had stepped back, physically distancing himself from the explosion. Kyle was alone at the front of the room, the screen behind him now showing a final slide I hadn't programmed: "Data integrity compromised, recommend full audit." The old system was flawed. I was trying to correct." "Stop," Walsh turned to her assistant. Get internal audit and legal in here immediately. Nobody leaves this room. The next 30 minutes were a massacre in slow motion. The dashboard continued updating in real time, pulling fresh data that contradicted every claim Kyle had made. Marcus presented his financial analysis showing millions in unaccounted revenue discrepancies. Sarah outlined the legal exposure from breached contracts. Janet's team had forwarded a compilation of customer complaints that Kyle's system had ignored. Through it all, I sat at my desk, invisible in my special projects corner, watching the glass-walled theater of Kyle's destruction. I didn't need to say a word. The numbers were speaking for themselves, screaming the truth Kyle had tried to bury. At 9:47 a.m., Walsh asked the question that sealed everything. Who built the original retention model, the accurate one? There was a pause before Marcus answered. Natalie Carter. She was moved to special projects 6 weeks ago. Walsh's eyes scanned the office floor until they found me. Our gazes met through the glass. I raised my coffee cup slightly, a tiny acknowledgement. Get her in here, Walsh commanded. Now. I walked into the boardroom with measured steps, carrying nothing but a single USB drive. The room fell silent as I entered, 20 pairs of eyes tracking my movement. Kyle stood frozen at the front, his red tie now looking like a target painted on his chest. Evan had shrunk into his chair, trying to become invisible. Ms. Carter, CEO Walsh said, her voice cutting through the tension. We need to understand what happened here. I inserted the USB into the presentation system. May I? Walsh nodded. My first slide was simple, ignored warnings Q3 analysis. No flashy graphics, no bold claims, just data. 6 weeks ago, my predictive model identified 17 at-risk enterprise accounts, I began, my voice calm and clinical. These warnings were systematically reclassified as noise in the new system. As of this morning, 14 of those accounts have churned, representing $12 million in lost annual revenue. I clicked to the next slide, a graph showing 2 lines my model's predictions versus actual outcomes. They matched with 92% accuracy. The original retention model took 3 years to develop and refine. It tracked 17 variables, used machine learning to identify patterns, and provided 90-day advance warning for at-risk accounts. I paused, letting that sink in. Customer Pulse 2.0 tracks 5 variables and provides 30-day warnings. By then, it's usually too late. Board member Harrison, who ran a hedge fund before joining our board, leaned forward. You're saying we had a working system that was replaced with an inferior one. I'm saying we had a precise surgical instrument that was replaced with a hammer, I replied. The room erupted again, but Walsh raised her hand. Continue, Ms. Carter. I pulled up the smoking gun, the email thread between Kyle and Evan about flexibility and metrics. The degradation wasn't accidental. It was designed to hide problems rather than solve them. I clicked through screenshots of Kyle's progressive data manipulations. Week 1 at-risk accounts moved to seasonal variance. Week 3 churned customers reclassified as dormant. Week 5 historical data altered to create artificial improvement. That's not, Kyle started. Your user ID is on every database modification, I said, pulling up the audit logs. Every timestamp, every query, every alteration. Would you like me to show the video footage of you running these scripts at 12:23 a.m. last Monday? Kyle's face went white. Evan stood up abruptly. I need to... Sit down, Mr. Brooks, Walsh commanded. You supervise this disaster. I moved to my final section. The actual state of Q3. The real numbers appeared 15.3% churn, 8% revenue decline, 3 major accounts lost on Friday alone, another 7 in final termination proceedings. But here's what the board was about to approve based on falsified data, I continued, showing Kyle's original presentation plan. Expanded investment in Customer Pulse 2.0 bonuses for the retention team, and ironically, the elimination of the Special Projects division as redundant. That last bit was news to everyone. Kyle had been planning to eliminate even my exile position, the final insult to ensure I couldn't interfere. CFO Park was doing calculations on his tablet. If these projections are correct, we're looking at a potential $40 million loss in the next quarter if we don't correct course immediately. It's correctable, I said, pulling up my final slide. The original model is still functional. I've been running it in parallel, maintaining its accuracy. We can identify and intervene with at-risk accounts starting today, but we need to act within the next 72 hours for the 7 accounts in termination proceedings. Walsh stood up. Mr. Mason, Mr. Brooks, please collect your personal items. Security will escort you out. Legal will be in touch regarding potential criminal charges for data fraud. Kyle finally found his voice. Criminal charges, I was just trying to... You committed fraud, Sarah from legal stated flatly. Falsifying financial data that impacts investor reports is a federal crime. As security arrived, Kyle turned to me, his face twisted with rage. You set me up. I met his gaze steadily. No, Kyle, I just stopped hiding your failures. You buried yourself. Evan tried one last play. Margaret, this is a misunderstanding. I can explain. The only thing you'll be explaining is how you supervised this catastrophe. Walsh cut him off. Get them out of here. As they were escorted out, the boardroom fell silent. Walsh turned to me. The retention strategy position. It's yours if you want it, with a 20% raise and full autonomy to rebuild the team. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt oddly calm. I'll need 3 senior analysts of my choosing. Direct reporting to you instead of through middle management, and access to all historical data to perform a full audit of what else might have been compromised. Walsh smiled, the first time I'd ever seen her genuinely smile. Done. When can you start? I never stopped, I said, pulling up my laptop to show the real-time dashboard I'd been maintaining. I've already identified the 7 accounts we can still save. If you'll excuse me, I have some phone calls to make. I walked out of the boardroom, passing the empty desks that had once belonged to Kyle and Evan. Their personal items were being boxed up by security, their computer access already revoked. The office was buzzing with shock and speculation, but I didn't stop to engage in the gossip. I had work to do, real work, the kind that actually mattered. At my desk in special projects, soon to be relocated back to the main floor, I pulled up the first at-risk account and reached for my phone. Behind me, through the glass walls, I could see the board still in session, undoubtedly discussing the legal ramifications and damage control. But that wasn't my concern anymore. My concern was the truth, the data, and the customers who'd almost been lost to a narcissist's vanity metrics. The first client picked up on the second ring. This is Natalie Carter from Data Vault Solutions. I'm calling about some concerns our system has flagged with your account. I'd like to personally address them before they become problems. The relief in the client's voice was palpable. Finally, someone who's actually listening. I smiled. A small, private smile. Yes, finally, someone was listening. And the numbers. The numbers never stopped telling the truth. The emergency all-hands meeting was called for 2 p.m. that same Monday. The entire company gathered in the main conference hall, the atmosphere thick with rumors and speculation. I stood at the back, leaning against the wall, observing the anxious faces of colleagues who had avoided me for weeks. CEO Walsh took the podium, her expression grave. By now, you've heard that significant changes have occurred in our analytics and retention divisions. I'm here to address them directly. She didn't mince words. The presentation behind her showed the real numbers, the ones Kyle had hidden. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the 15.3% churn rate appeared, followed by the revenue losses. We've been operating on falsified data for 6 weeks, Walsh continued. This deception has cost us millions and damaged our credibility with clients. Effective immediately. Kyle Mason and Evan Brooks are no longer with the company. The matter has been referred to federal authorities for investigation. The room exploded in whispers. Through the crowd, I saw Kyle's former admirers, the ones who'd laughed at his jokes and praised his innovation, now shaking their heads in disgust. The narrative had already shifted. He was no longer the golden boy. He was the cautionary tale. However, Walsh raised her voice, bringing back order. I'm pleased to announce that Natalie Carter will be returning to lead our retention strategy team. Her original predictive model, which some of you may remember, identified every single account we lost. Had we listened to the data instead of the narrative, we would have prevented this crisis. Heads turned, searching for me. I stayed against the wall, arms crossed, expression neutral. Walsh pulled up a new slide. It showed my model's predictions overlaid with actual outcomes, an almost perfect match. This is what competence looks like. This is what happens when we value substance over style, data over deception. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. Walsh looked directly at me across the room. "Ms. Carter, would you like to address the team?" 200 faces turned toward me. 6 weeks ago, these same people had watched me get exiled without a word of support. Now they waited for my wisdom, my forgiveness, maybe my anger. I pushed off from the wall and walked to the front, taking my time. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. "The numbers never lie," I said simply. "They whisper warnings before they scream disasters. Kyle chose to silence them. Evan chose to ignore them. Many of you chose to look away." I paused, scanning the room. "The question now is, will you listen?" I pulled up my phone, checking the time. It's 2:15 p.m. In the last 15 minutes, while we've been talking, our predictive model has flagged 2 more at-risk accounts. One is a 3-year client worth $2 million annually. The other is a startup that could become our biggest success story or our next loss. I put my phone away. I don't need speeches or apologies. I need analysts who care more about accuracy than appearances. I need team members who will speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. And I need a company culture that rewards honesty over harmony. Walking back through the crowd, I heard Marcus from finance start clapping. Sarah from legal joined him, then Janet from customer service. Soon the entire room was applauding. But I was already at the door. I had saved 7 accounts by the end of that day. Each phone call was a revelation to clients who'd felt ignored for weeks. By Tuesday, we'd retained $42 million in revenue that would have been lost. By Friday, the board had approved a complete overhaul of our reporting structure with built-in audit systems that would make Kyle's deception impossible to repeat. The federal investigation moved quickly. Kyle's digital footprints were so sloppy that prosecutors built their case in weeks. Evan tried to claim ignorance, but his emails betrayed him. Both were facing charges for securities fraud, with potential sentences of up to 5 years. I never testified. I didn't need to. The data spoke louder than any witness could. 3 months later, sitting in my corner office, yes, they gave me Evan's old space, I received an email from Kyle. He was asking for a reference, claiming he'd been unfairly scapegoated and that I owed him for teaching him about data analytics. I archived the email without responding and turned back to my monitors. 3 screens showing real data, real patterns, real solutions. My team of 8 analysts worked quietly around me, each one chosen for their integrity as much as their intelligence. The company had learned its lesson, expensively yet thoroughly. The board now required dual validation on all metrics. Whistleblower protections were strengthened, and my predictive model became the gold standard, licensed to 3 other companies by year's end. But the sweetest victory wasn't the vindication or the promotion, or even watching Kyle and Evan escorted out by security. It was the quiet afternoon when Janet from customer service stopped by my office with coffee and said, "A client just told me we're the only vendor who actually seems to know what they need before they do. Thought you should know." I smiled, sipping the coffee she'd brought. It was exactly how I liked it. Black, no sugar, no cream, just like my data, pure, unfiltered, and impossible to misinterpret. The numbers never lie. They had been my weapon, my shield, and ultimately, my vindication. And in the end, I didn't even have to raise my voice. I just had to let them speak. Thank you for listening to my story of corporate revenge. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed similar workplace deception? How did you handle it? Your experiences matter, and I read every comment. Until next time, remember the truth always finds a way.